Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the brutal secrets of the Romanov family, a dynasty whose ending was as dramatic as their reign was long. Imagine yourself stepping back in time, not to a quaint, dusty museum, but right into the heart of their opulent yet ultimately suffocating world. You're not just reading about history, you're living it, breathing in the scent of aged velvet and fading grandeur, feeling the chill of a grand, echoing palace, even as the walls around them began to crumble. This isn't your grandma's bedtime story. This is the real, unvarnished truth, where power, privilege, and personal tragedy intertwine in a way that'll make your modern-day woes seem like a walk in the park. Seriously, you probably wouldn't survive a week in their shoes, between the political machinations, the rigid social etiquette, and the ever-present threat of disease or revolution. Modern life is a cakewalk, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported, not as a casual observer, but as an almost spectral presence within the very fabric of early 20th century Russia. Specifically within the gilded cages of the Romanov imperial residences. You breathe the same air, thick with the scent of beeswax, old books, and perhaps a faint, lingering aroma of expensive perfume that hints at lives lived in extreme luxury. This isn't just any royal family, this is the Romanovs, a name synonymous with absolute power, unyielding tradition, and, ultimately, an unimaginable downfall. As you drift through the vast, echoing halls of the Winter Palace, then later, Tsarskoye Selo, you begin to grasp the sheer scale of their existence. Every chandelier glitters with hundreds of crystals, each one meticulously cleaned. Every painting on the wall is a masterpiece, depicting glorious battles or serene landscapes, all chosen to reflect the unshakable power of the Tsar. You notice the deep pile of the Persian rugs beneath your feet, so thick they almost swallow your footsteps, muffling any sound and adding to the surreal quietness that pervades these grand spaces. The Tsar, Nicholas II, moves with a certain regal awkwardness. He's not a man born for the brutal realities of a rapidly modernizing world, but rather a gentle soul, more at home with his family than with the heavy crown he bears. You see the constant weight on his shoulders, a subtle slump that even his impeccable uniform cannot hide. His eyes, often described as kind, hold a faraway look, perhaps dreaming of simpler times, or perhaps just overwhelmed by the immense burden of ruling such a vast and turbulent empire. You watch as he meticulously signs documents, countless decrees that shape the lives of millions. Yet you sense a disconnect, a profound isolation that separates him from the very people he governs. Then there is the Tsarina, Alexandra Fyodorovna, a German princess who converted to Orthodoxy and became more Russian than many Russians. At least in her fervent devotion, you observe her, often cloaked in an air of profound melancholy, a perpetual sadness that seems to cling to her like her heavy velvet gowns. She is intensely private, almost reclusive, and her distrust of the outside world grows with each passing year. Her primary focus, her very essence, revolves around her children, particularly her only son, the Tsarevich Alexei. You feel her anxiety, a constant, gnawing fear that twists her stomach and steals her sleep. This isn't just motherly worry, it's a desperate, consuming terror rooted in Alexei's debilitating illness. Hemophilia. Every bruise, every cut, every stumble could be life-threatening. You see the quick intake of breath when he scrapes his knee, the immediate rush of attendants, the hushed voices filled with dread. This secret, the Tsarevich's fragile health, is a tightly guarded one, a brutal truth that gnaws at the heart of the imperial family, pushing them further into isolation. The children, the four Grand Duchesses Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and the young Tsarevich Alexei, live lives of unimaginable privilege. Yet they too are prisoners of their status. You watch them play, their laughter echoing through the vast, empty rooms, a fleeting moment of childish innocence. They have countless toys, dedicated tutors, and servants who cater to their every whim. But you also notice the subtle restrictions, the limited contact with children outside the imperial circle. The constant surveillance, the ever-present security guards. Their world is vast in its luxury, but small in its scope. Olga, the eldest, possesses a thoughtful seriousness. Tatiana, elegant and poised, often takes charge. Maria, sweet and gentle. Anastasia, the youngest Grand Duchess, is full of boundless energy, known for her mischievous antics and infectious giggle. She's the one who tries to inject some fun into the rigid court life, often playing pranks on her tutors or servants. You can almost hear her conspiratorial whispers as she tries to convince her sisters to join her in some innocent mischief. This opulent existence, however, is a fragile bubble. Outside the palace walls, a different Russia stirs. You feel the palpable tension, the simmering discontent that permeates the air like a coming storm. The vast majority of the population lives in abject poverty, toiling in fields or cramped factories, while the imperial family basks in boundless wealth. The disparity is glaring, a stark contrast that fuels resentment. You hear whispers of strikes, of protests, of revolutionary ideas spreading like wildfire through the working classes and intellectual circles. The Romanovs, for all their power, seem strangely oblivious, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge. The depth of this growing chasm is like watching someone meticulously arrange their china while their house is slowly catching fire. The year is 1913, and the Romanovs are celebrating their 300th anniversary on the throne. You are swept up in the elaborate festivities, the parades, the religious ceremonies, the seemingly endless banquets. The entire empire appears to be celebrating, demonstrating a unified front of loyalty to the Tsar. You see the crowds cheering, the banners waving, the sense of national pride swelling. It's a grand display of power and tradition, an almost theatrical performance designed to reinforce the legitimacy of their rule. Yet, even amidst the jubilant cries of "God save the Tsar," you can't shake the feeling of unease. It's a powerful, almost psychic sense that this dazzling display is merely a thin veneer, masking deeper cracks within the foundations of the empire. Historians still debate whether this celebration truly reflected widespread popular support or was a carefully orchestrated propaganda event, designed to paper over the growing discontent that lay beneath the surface. It was certainly a spectacle, a last hurrah of sorts for an autocratic system teetering on the brink. You might even call it the ultimate fake-it-till-you-make-it moment, only they weren't making it. An intriguing detail that often goes unnoticed amidst the grand narratives is the Tsar's almost obsessive reliance on spiritualism and mysticism. You learn that he and Alexandra frequently consulted with various mystics, holy men, and even charlatans, seeking guidance and solace, especially concerning Alexei's health. This wasn't just a casual interest, it was a desperate quest for divine intervention, a search for answers that traditional medicine couldn't provide. You see the Empress, particularly, becoming increasingly isolated and dependent on these figures, believing them to hold the key to her son's survival and the empire's stability. This particular vulnerability would soon be exploited by one of the most infamous figures in Russian history. The Romanovs' immense wealth and their insistence on absolute rule created an environment where information was filtered, dissent was suppressed, and the true pulse of the nation remained largely unknown to them. You observe the court life, a world of intricate etiquette, endless ceremonies, and a rigid hierarchy that kept everyone in their place. Decisions were made in hushed tones behind closed doors, far removed from the struggles of the common people. The court itself became a microcosm of the empire's problems, rife with gossip, rivalries, and a sense of entitlement that bordered on delusion. You see the nobility, many of them clinging to outdated privileges, oblivious to the storm brewing outside their gilded cages. It's almost like watching a reality TV show where the contestants have no idea the cameras are still rolling, capturing their every misstep and revealing their ultimate vulnerability. You can practically hear the background music building, signaling the impending disaster, the opulence, the isolation, the desperate search for a miracle. It all sets the stage for the dramatic, tragic events that will soon unfold. The air is thick with the unspoken, the unacknowledged, and the inevitable. You continue your spectral journey, now sensing a subtle shift in the palace's atmosphere. The quiet opulence remains, but beneath it, a new presence begins to assert itself, one that will ultimately accelerate the Romanovs' tragic trajectory. You feel a tremor of unease, a pervasive sense of disquiet among the courtiers and even within the imperial family itself. This shift is directly tied to the arrival and escalating influence of an enigmatic figure, Grigory Rasputin. He arrives in St. Petersburg like a shadow from the Siberian wilderness, a self-proclaimed holy man, or starets, with piercing blue eyes that seem to hold an unsettling depth. His unkempt appearance, his peasant origins, and his unconventional manners stand in stark contrast to the refined world of the imperial court. Yet, it is precisely his supposed spiritual powers and his purported ability to heal that draw him into the inner circle. You witness the Tsarina, Alexandra, in her most vulnerable moments. Her devotion to Rasputin is not merely a passing fancy. It is a desperate, almost fanatical belief born from a mother's agony. You see her clutching at straws, her rational mind overridden by the primal need to alleviate her son, Alexei's suffering. When doctors, with all their modern knowledge, can offer no lasting relief for his hemophilia, Rasputin enters their lives and, miraculously, seems to possess a calming effect on the boy, sometimes even appearing to stem his bleeding crises. You observe how, during one of Alexei's severe episodes, when doctors had given up hope, Rasputin is summoned. He reportedly prays over the boy, and Alexei's condition improves, sometimes dramatically. You feel Alexandra's immense relief, her profound gratitude, a mother's joy so intense it borders on blindness to the consequences. For her, he is nothing short of a divine messenger, a man sent by God to save her beloved son. This conviction, forged in the crucible of maternal desperation, becomes an unshakable shield around Rasputin, protecting him from all criticism, no matter how valid. However, you also see the court's reaction, a mixture of bewilderment, disgust, and outright fear. The Russian aristocracy, steeped in tradition and acutely aware of appearances, finds Rasputin's presence repulsive. They see a crude, unwashed peasant, rumored to engage in scandalous orgies and drunken revelries, holding sway over the Empress of Russia. You hear the whispers, the hushed condemnations echoing through the palace corridors. He's a charlatan. He's debauching the Empress. He's destroying the monarchy from within. You feel the rising tide of indignation, a growing chasm between the imperial family's unwavering faith in Rasputin and the rest of society's profound apprehension. The members of the court, the ministers, even the Tsar's own relatives, try desperately to warn Nicholas and Alexandra about Rasputin's unsavory reputation and the damage he is inflicting on the monarchy's image. You witness their pleas, their arguments, their thinly veiled threats. all met with Alexandra's cold defiance and Nicholas's weary indifference. He trusts his wife implicitly, and if she believes in Rasputin, then he, by extension, must also tolerate him. The Tsar himself, Nicholas, is caught in an unenviable position. You see his struggle, torn between his wife's unshakable faith and the mounting pressure from his advisors and family. He is a man of deep religious conviction, and perhaps a part of him also believes in Rasputin's spiritual powers. Or, at the very least, he cannot bring himself to deny his wife the only source of comfort she seems to find in her agonizing worry over Alexei. His weakness, his inability to firmly dismiss Rasputin, is seen by many as a fatal flaw, further eroding his authority and the people's confidence in his leadership. You feel his weariness, his quiet despair, as he navigates this impossible situation. A king unable to control his own court, let alone his own family's choices. It's like watching someone trying to steer a massive ship with a teacup. Rasputin's influence isn't limited to the Tsarevich's health. You observe how he begins to meddle in affairs of state, recommending appointments and dismissals of government ministers. You see the shock and outrage when high-ranking officials are suddenly replaced by incompetent cronies or individuals favored by Rasputin. Historians still debate the true extent of Rasputin's political power, and whether he was truly dictating policy or merely serving as a conduit for Alexandra's own desires and prejudices. However, the perception, which in politics is often more powerful than reality, was that this illiterate peasant held the fate of Russia in his dirty, unmanicured hands. This erosion of governmental competence, coupled with the scandal of his personal life, further destabilizes the already fragile political landscape. You sense the growing chaos, the increasing inefficiency. As the machinery of government grinds to a halt under the weight of such bizarre and unpredictable interventions, the rumors about Rasputin's depravity spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of Russia. You hear the salacious tales, some true, many exaggerated, of his drunken orgies, his hypnotic gaze, his supposed sexual exploits with high society women, even whispers about his intimate relationship with the Tsarina herself. These stories, whether accurate or not, poison the public's perception of the monarchy. You witness the once revered image of the Tsar and Tsarina slowly but surely morphing into a caricature of incompetence and immorality. The sacred aura of the Romanov dynasty, built over 300 years, is being systematically dismantled by the actions of one controversial figure. It's like watching a reputation built on centuries of tradition unravel in real time. Replaced by an image of scandal and weakness, the court, once a bastion of loyalty, becomes a hotbed of conspiracy. You feel the palpable desperation among those who truly care for the monarchy's survival. They realize that Rasputin's continued presence is a ticking time bomb, threatening to ignite a revolution. You hear the desperate plans being hatched, the secret meetings, the hushed discussions about how to remove him. There's a growing consensus that for the good of Russia, for the preservation of the dynasty, Rasputin must be eliminated. This leads to one of the most infamous assassination plots in history. An interesting, perhaps lesser-known fact about Rasputin is his almost superhuman ability to survive. You observe the multiple attempts on his life, each one more dramatic than the last, leading to an almost mythic status around his resilience. He was poisoned with cyanide-laced cakes and wine, enough to kill several men, but it had no effect. He was shot multiple times, left for dead, and yet he miraculously survived. Or so it seemed. This incredible resistance to death only fueled the perception of his unholy powers, making him even more terrifying to his enemies. You can almost hear the frantic exclamations of his would-be killers. He just won't die. It adds a layer of macabre humor, or perhaps horror, to the story. Depending on your perspective, finally, you are present for the night of December 16th, 1916 OS. You feel the chill of the St. Petersburg winter as you accompany the conspirators, Prince Felix Yusupov, a wealthy aristocrat and the Tsar's cousin-in-law, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's cousin, and Vladimir Perishkovich, a right-wing Duma member as they lure Rasputin to Yusupov's palace. You see the forced pleasantries, the nervous smiles, the carefully laid trap. You watch as they offer him the poisoned cakes and wine. You feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife, as they wait for the poison to take effect. But Rasputin remains unfazed, seemingly immune, frustrated and desperate. Yusupov retrieves a revolver. You hear the muffled shot, the sudden, violent sound tearing through the elegant quiet of the palace. Rasputin falls, thinking him dead. The conspirators leave. But then, to their horror, you see Rasputin suddenly stir, his eyes opening, and he struggles to his feet, lunging at Yusupov, a grotesque, terrifying figure. Another shot rings out, then another. Still, he lives finally. They bludgeon him, wrap him in a rug, and throw him into the icy Neva River. You feel the final, chilling moment as his body sinks beneath the frozen surface. The sheer brutality of the assassination underscores the desperation of those who sought to rid Russia of his influence. It's like watching a horror movie where the monster just keeps coming back. Only in this case, the monster was a man who seemed to defy death. The news of Rasputin's death reverberates throughout Russia. You sense a fleeting moment of relief among many, a hope that with him gone, the monarchy might yet recover. However, the damage is already done. His scandalous life, his hold over the Tsarina, and the brutal manner of his death have all contributed to the precipitous decline of the Romanovs' prestige and authority. You realize that his death, rather than saving the monarchy, merely accelerates its demise, stripping away the last vestiges of its divine right and exposing its profound vulnerability. The trust is broken, the public is disillusioned, and the stage is now set for a much larger, more cataclysmic event. You find yourself enveloped in a new kind of silence within the Romanov world, one far more ominous than the quiet opulence of the palaces. Rasputin is gone, but his spectral influence lingers. Having irrevocably weakened the imperial family's standing, now, a far more colossal force begins to assert its dominance, shaking the very foundations of the Russian Empire World War I on. You feel the immense, suffocating weight of this global conflict as it crashes upon Russia's shores, exposing every crack and flaw in the already brittle autocratic system. Initially, you sense a wave of patriotic fervor sweeping through the nation. As Russia declares war on Germany in August 1914, you witness scenes of enthusiastic crowds cheering, men eagerly volunteering for service, and a fleeting sense of unity against a common enemy. The Tsar, for a brief period, seems to regain some of his lost popularity. As people rally around the symbol of the monarchy in a time of national crisis, you see Nicholas appear on the balcony of the Winter Palace, accepting the adulation of the masses, a flicker of his former grandeur returning. It's almost as if the empire collectively held its breath, hoping this war would somehow cleanse the nation and reaffirm the Tsar's divine right. However, this brief honeymoon period quickly dissipates, replaced by the grim realities of modern warfare. You are transported to the vast, brutal Eastern Front, where the scale of the conflict is almost unimaginable. You feel the bone-chilling cold of the Russian winter, the pervasive mud of the spring thaws, and the constant, deafening roar of artillery. You witness the sheer inefficiency and unpreparedness of the Russian army. Soldiers are sent to the front lines without proper rifles, sometimes sharing one between 3 men, or even told to pick up a weapon from a fallen comrade. Ammunition is scarce. Medical supplies are woefully inadequate. and the logistical nightmare of supplying such a massive army across the vast Russian landscape quickly becomes apparent. You see young, ill-equipped conscripts marching bravely to their deaths, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and bewildered determination. The human cost is staggering. You witness the unending stream of casualties, the wounded and dying flooding back from the front lines, overwhelming hospitals and draining the nation's morale. Millions of Russian soldiers perish in the early years of the war, a horrifying toll that dwarfs the losses of other Allied powers. You hear the mournful cries of widows and orphans, the bitter complaints of peasants whose sons have been sacrificed in a war they barely understand. The initial patriotic fervor turns into a deep, pervasive weariness and then into bitter resentment. As the war drags on, Tsar Nicholas II makes a fateful decision that seals his doom. In September 1915, he takes personal command of the Russian army at the front. Leaving the Tsarina Alexandra in charge of the government in Petrograd St. Petersburg was renamed during the war due to its German-sounding name. You observe this moment with a profound sense of foreboding, while Nicholas believed it was his duty to lead his troops. He lacked any real military experience or strategic acumen. His presence at the front, far from inspiring his soldiers, often led to confusion and poor decisions. You sense his isolation there, away from the political machinations of the capital, yet also entirely detached from the grim realities faced by the common soldier. He was playing soldier, while his empire was crumbling back in Petrograd. The Tsarina's regency proves disastrous. You watch as Alexandra, still grieving and still deeply influenced by Rasputin's memory and her own fervent, often misguided, convictions, makes a series of catastrophic decisions. Her German heritage makes her deeply unpopular with the Russian public, who view her with suspicion and accuse her of being a German spy. These accusations, though baseless, gain traction amidst the paranoia of wartime. You see her dismiss competent ministers and replace them with incompetent favorites, often based on their perceived loyalty to her and, in some cases, to the memory of Rasputin. The government becomes a revolving door of unqualified officials, leading to administrative chaos and a complete loss of public trust. It's like watching someone trying to run a complex machine by randomly pushing buttons, hoping something good will happen. The economic situation in Russia rapidly deteriorates under the strain of war. You feel the gnawing pangs of hunger in the cities as food supplies dwindle. The railway system, already inefficient, buckles under the pressure of transporting troops and supplies, leading to severe shortages in urban centers. Factories, stretched to their limit, cannot meet the demands of both the war effort and the civilian population. You see long lines forming outside bakeries. The desperation on people's faces growing with each passing day. Inflation skyrockets, making what little food is available unaffordable for most. The working classes, already struggling, are pushed to their breaking point. You hear the rumbling of discontent, not just whispers now, but open complaints and angry shouts in the streets. The Tsarina's increasing reliance on spiritualism and her unwavering, almost blind, faith in God to solve all problems further, alienates her from reality. You observe her spending hours in prayer, seemingly detached from the mounting crisis outside the palace walls. She genuinely believes that divine intervention will save Russia, even as the empire spirals into anarchy. This unwavering faith, once a source of comfort, now appears as a fatal delusion to those around her. It's a tragic irony, almost a punchline to a very dark joke, that a family so devoutly religious could be so blind to the earthly suffering of their people. An intriguing aspect of this period, often overlooked, is the sheer scale of the propaganda campaigns launched by both sides during the war. While Russia's efforts were often less sophisticated than those of Western powers, you would have witnessed the proliferation of posters, pamphlets, and newspaper articles demonizing the enemy and glorifying the Tsar and the war effort. Yet, these often fail to resonate with a populace increasingly disillusioned by the harsh realities they faced. The gap between the glorious narratives of the propaganda and the brutal truth on the ground widened into a chasm. Further eroding the credibility of the government, the war also highlighted the growing divide between the monarchy and the Duma. Russia's elected legislative assembly. You see the Duma deputies, many of whom are desperate to save Russia from collapse, pleading with the Tsar to implement reforms, to address the food shortages, and to form a government capable of effectively managing the war effort. They propose a Ministry of Public Confidence, a government that would be accountable to the people rather than just the Tsar. But Nicholas, clinging to his autocratic power, rejects their pleas, viewing any attempt to curb his authority as a challenge to his divine right. You feel the frustration and despair of these reformers, who see the inevitable coming, but are powerless to stop it. Historians still debate whether a more flexible and responsive Tsar could have averted the revolution by making concessions at this point, or if the forces of change had already become too powerful to contain. The elite, too, becomes increasingly disillusioned. You hear conversations in aristocratic salons and military headquarters where generals and nobles openly criticize the Tsar and Tsarina, even contemplating drastic measures to save the dynasty. The sheer incompetence and perceived treachery within the imperial family's inner circle, particularly due to Alexandra's German background and her disastrous appointments, reach a breaking point. The murder of Rasputin, though a desperate act, did nothing to stem the tide. In fact, it merely underscored the utter desperation of the situation. It was a sign that even those closest to the throne had lost faith in the Tsar's ability to rule. By late 1916 and early 1917, the situation is dire. You see the widespread strikes in the factories, the desertions from the army, and the growing unrest in the cities. The combination of military defeats, economic hardship, and a deeply unpopular government creates a volatile cocktail. The capital, Petrograd, becomes a powder keg. Soldiers, tired of fighting a seemingly endless and pointless war, begin to sympathize with the striking workers. The police, once the Tsar's loyal enforcers, are increasingly overwhelmed and demoralized. You feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, like the calm before a devastating storm. Every small protest, every minor incident, feels like a prelude to something far larger. The Romanovs, isolated within their palace walls, remain stubbornly out of touch. You observe them, still living a life of relative comfort, convinced of their divine mission, even as their empire crumbles around them. Their inability to comprehend the depth of popular anger, their refusal to acknowledge the true extent of the crisis, is perhaps the most brutal secret of all. Their profound disconnect from the reality of the nation they ruled. They were watching a different movie, one where they were the heroic protagonists. Rather than the tragic figures of a failing monarchy, the stage is perfectly set, not for a peaceful transition, but for a violent upheaval that will sweep them away forever. You are now swept into the chaotic maelstrom of February 1917, feeling the raw energy of a nation at its breaking point. The quiet desperation of the war years explodes into outright rebellion, and you witness the stunningly swift collapse of a dynasty that had reigned for over 3 centuries. The air in Petrograd is no longer thick with just tension, but with palpable anger and the scent of revolution. It begins subtly, almost innocuously, with bread shortages. You see the long lines of desperate women, shivering in the brutal Russian winter, waiting for hours outside bakeries, only to be told there's nothing left. This isn't just hunger, it's a profound injustice that sparks widespread outrage. On February 23rd to March 8th, New Style. On International Women's Day, thousands of female textile workers in Petrograd walk off their jobs, demanding bread and peace. You feel their frustration, their exhaustion, as they march through the streets, their voices rising in a unified cry for change. This isn't a planned revolution, it's a spontaneous eruption of popular fury. A spark that quickly ignites a tinderbox. You witness the crowds swelling, drawing in other factory workers, students, and disaffected citizens. The initial protests quickly escalate from demands for bread to calls for an end to the war and, most dangerously for the Romanovs, an end to the autocracy. Down with the Tsar and down with the war become the rallying cries that echo through the capital. You feel the momentum building, an unstoppable force as more and more people join the ranks of the protesters. The police, once seemingly omnipotent, are overwhelmed. They try to disperse the crowds, but their efforts are futile against the sheer numbers and the unyielding determination of the people. Crucially, you observe the military's reaction. The Tsar, far away at the military headquarters in Mogilev, issues orders to put down the rebellion with force. But when the troops are sent to confront the protesters, something unexpected happens. You feel the profound shift in loyalty as soldiers, many of whom are young conscripts from peasant backgrounds, begin to hesitate. They see their own mothers, sisters, and neighbors among the protesters. They have endured the same hardships, the same hunger, the same feudal war. You watch as some units refuse to fire on the crowds. Then, in a pivotal moment, entire regiments begin to mutiny, turning their rifles not on the people, but on their own officers. You hear the shouts of solidarity, the cheers of the crowd as soldiers embrace the protesters, signaling the irreversible collapse of the Tsar's authority. This defection of the military is the death knell for the monarchy. It's like watching the last pillar of a grand building crumble, knowing the entire structure is about to collapse. The disintegration of order in Petrograd is rapid and absolute. You see government buildings seized, police stations ransacked, and political prisoners freed. The streets, once orderly and controlled, become a swirling vortex of rebellion. News of the unrest reaches Tsar Nicholas at the front, but he struggles to grasp the gravity of the situation. He dismisses it as a mere riot, confident that order will soon be restored. This fundamental misjudgment of the situation underscores his profound disconnect from the reality of his empire. He truly believed his people loved him, and these were just temporary agitators. The Duma, which the Tsar had effectively sidelined, now attempts to take control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. You witness the deputies, many of whom had been the loyal monarchists just weeks before. Realizing that the old order is irretrievable, they form a provisional government, a desperate attempt to create a new, legitimate authority and restore some semblance of order before complete anarchy takes hold. Simultaneously, workers and soldiers in Petrograd form the Petrograd Soviet, a council representing their interests, which quickly becomes a powerful rival to the provisional government. You feel the tension between these two nascent powers, both vying for control in the power vacuum left by the collapsing monarchy. Historians still debate whether the provisional government, if given more time and support, could have stabilized Russia and prevented the Bolshevik Revolution later that year. Nicholas, finally comprehending the scale of the uprising, decides to return to Petrograd. You follow his train journey, a slow, agonizing trip that is repeatedly delayed and rerouted as railway workers, now part of the rebellion, obstruct his path. He is, in essence, trapped, unable to reach his capital, unable to exert his authority. He learns that even his generals, the very men he trusted to put down the rebellion, now believe his abdication is the only way to save Russia from total collapse. They argue that his continued presence on the throne is only fueling the revolutionary fires. You are present for the agonizing moment on March 15th. New style when Nicholas signs his abdication manifesto. He initially abdicates in favor of his son, Alexei, with his brother Grand Duke Michael acting as regent. However, upon being advised that Alexei's fragile health would make him an unsuitable ruler in such turbulent times, and fearing that he would be separated from his son, Nicholas changes his mind. He then abdicates for himself and Alexei, naming his brother Michael as the next Tsar. You feel the immense weight of this decision, the culmination of centuries of Romanov rule ending with a pen stroke. It's a quiet, understated end to such a grand, turbulent reign, almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. However, the Grand Duke Michael, witnessing the overwhelming popular sentiment against the monarchy, wisely declines the throne the very next day. He recognizes that accepting the crown would only plunge Russia into further civil war. You feel the finality of this decision. The Romanov dynasty, which had held absolute power for 304 years, has officially fallen. There is no longer a Tsar, no longer an emperor. The absolute monarchy is gone. Seemingly overnight, the imperial family, now stripped of their power and protection, become mere citizens. You witness their immediate change in status. They are no longer rulers, but captives. Albeit initially under relatively comfortable house arrest, they are moved to their residence at Tsarskoye Selo, near Petrograd, where they remain under guard. You see the Tsarina, Alexandra, still clinging to her faith, still believing that somehow divine intervention will restore them to power. Nicholas, meanwhile, seems almost relieved of the immense burden of leadership, content to spend his time with his family. Now that the weight of the crown is lifted, it's a strange, almost surreal calm after the storm, a temporary reprieve before the true brutality of their fate unfolds. This swift and relatively bloodless overthrow of the monarchy is a remarkable historical event. You might wonder, how could such a powerful dynasty collapse so quickly? The brutal secret lies in its profound isolation and its inability to adapt. The Romanovs, particularly Nicholas and Alexandra, had become so detached from the reality of their country, so insulated by their divine right, that they simply could not comprehend the depth of popular discontent until it was too late. Their rigid adherence to autocracy in an age demanding change, their mishandling of the war, and their catastrophic choice to rely on figures like Rasputin fatally eroded their legitimacy. The February Revolution wasn't just a political uprising, it was a societal rejection of an entire way of life, a system that had become utterly unsustainable. The Romanovs, for all their imperial grandeur, were simply swept away by the tide of history, leaving behind a power vacuum that would soon be filled by even more radical forces. You now find yourself witnessing the strange, almost surreal calm that descends upon the Romanov family in the immediate aftermath of their abdication. Stripped of their imperial power, they are no longer the absolute rulers of Russia, but rather a family under house arrest. You observe them in their primary residence at Tsarskoye Selo, specifically the Alexander Palace, a place that was once their sanctuary of privilege but now feels more like a gilded cage. The initial days of their captivity are marked by a sense of bewildered normalcy. You see Nicholas, no longer burdened by the crushing weight of the crown, appearing almost relaxed. He spends his days gardening, chopping wood, and engaging in simple domestic chores, activities he genuinely enjoys. You watch him teach his children these tasks, perhaps finding a quiet solace in the mundane, a stark contrast to the grand pronouncements and weighty decisions that once defined his existence. He records these ordinary moments in his diary, often noting the weather or the number of trees he's felled, a poignant reflection of a man trying to find routine in an extraordinary situation. Alexandra, however, struggles more deeply with their changed circumstances. You feel her profound sense of loss, not just of power, but of her very identity as empress. Her unwavering faith remains her anchor, and you observe her spending long hours in prayer, clinging to the belief that divine intervention will still somehow restore them to their rightful place. She pours her energy into caring for her ailing son, Alexei, whose fragile health remains a constant source of anxiety. You see the deep lines of worry etched on her face, a perpetual sadness that even her piety cannot fully erase. She writes letters, often with a tone of resigned melancholy, yet always with an underlying hope that their suffering is part of a larger, divine plan. The children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, are confined to the palace grounds. Their lives drastically altered. You see their youthful spirits struggling against the confines of their new reality. They continue their lessons, read books, and play games, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Anastasia, still the mischievous one, tries to lighten the mood with her pranks and playful antics. Tatiana, ever the practical one, often takes on duties of caring for her younger siblings. Olga and Maria try to maintain a sense of dignity amidst the indignity. You hear their laughter, sometimes echoing hollowly through the grand rooms, a reminder of the innocence they are rapidly losing. Their interactions with the guards are curious sometimes, formal, sometimes surprisingly familiar, reflecting the strange intimacy of their shared confinement. The new provisional government, now in charge of Russia, grapples with what to do with the former imperial family. You sense the intense political pressure from various factions. Some argue for their immediate execution to prevent any monarchist resurgence. Others, more moderate, advocate for their exile, perhaps to Great Britain, where King George VI, Nicholas's cousin, initially offers asylum. You feel the constant shifts in political winds, the precariousness of their situation. For a brief period, it seems likely they might be allowed to leave Russia. However, the political landscape in Russia is becoming increasingly radicalized. You witness the growing power of the Bolsheviks, a revolutionary faction led by Vladimir Lenin, who advocate for a far more extreme socialist transformation. Their influence grows rapidly, particularly among the workers and soldiers, who are tired of the provisional government's perceived inaction on the war and land reform. You feel the rising tide of their anti-monarchist sentiment, their calls for swift and decisive action against all remnants of the old regime. The idea of exiling the Romanovs becomes less and less palatable to these increasingly powerful groups, who fear that the family could become a rallying point for counter-revolutionaries abroad. A particularly poignant detail you observe is the family's attempts to maintain their personal dignity and moral composure despite their imprisonment. You see them attend religious services regularly, finding solace in prayer and scripture. They treat their guards with a surprising degree of courtesy, sometimes even engaging them in conversation, sharing tea, or playing chess. This often disarms the soldiers, who are initially wary, but sometimes develop a surprising degree of respect, even pity, for their former rulers. However, you also sense the underlying tension, the constant awareness that these guards are ultimately their captors, and their fate rests in their hands. It's a strange dance between power and helplessness. As the months pass, the conditions of their imprisonment gradually worsen. You feel the tightening grip of their captors. Initially, they are allowed some personal freedom within the palace grounds, but as the political situation deteriorates and fears of counter-revolution grow, restrictions become more severe. Their personal staff is reduced, their mail is censored, and their contact with the outside world is almost entirely cut off. You see the frustration mount, particularly for Alexandra, who chafes under the restrictions, an intriguing aspect of their captivity, though often overshadowed by the larger tragedy. Is the children's remarkable resilience and adaptability, despite their royal upbringing. They adjust to the simpler life with surprising ease. They mend their own clothes, help with chores, and find ways to entertain themselves within their confined space. This speaks to a hidden strength and practicality that their pampered upbringing might have obscured. It's almost like watching a strange, sad experiment in forced self-sufficiency. Forced then. In August 1917, a pivotal decision is made by the provisional government. The Romanovs are to be moved. The ostensible reason is to protect them from the growing revolutionary fervor in Petrograd, but you sense a deeper motive to remove them further from any potential rescue attempts or monarchist plots. Their destination is Tobolsk, a remote town in Siberia, thousands of miles to the east. You witness their departure. A sad procession as they are loaded onto a train, no longer in luxury carriages, but in ordinary railway cars. Under heavy guard, the journey itself is long and arduous, a physical manifestation of their fall from grace. They pass through vast, desolate landscapes, a stark contrast to the grandeur they once knew. Upon arrival in Tobolsk, they are housed in the former governor's mansion, a large but less opulent residence than their previous palaces. You observe their attempts to make it a home, decorating rooms with their few salvaged belongings, trying to create some semblance of comfort. Nicholas continues his routine of manual labor. Finding solace in physical exertion, the children explore their new surroundings, making the most of their limited freedom. But the isolation is profound. They are truly cut off from the world, their only news coming from carefully vetted newspapers and letters, often weeks or months old. The brutal secret of this period of captivity is not just the physical confinement, but the psychological toll of uncertainty. You feel their fluctuating hopes and fears. Sometimes, they hear rumors of foreign intervention or monarchist plots to free them, igniting a brief spark of optimism. At other times, the grim realities of their situation press down upon them, filling them with despair. They are living in a limbo, suspended between a glorious past and an unknown, terrifying future. Historians still debate whether the provisional government truly intended to keep the Romanovs safe, or if their transfer to Siberia was a precursor to a more sinister plan. The fact remains that their removal to such a remote location made them increasingly vulnerable to the more radical forces soon to come to power. As you linger in Tobolsk, you sense the political landscape in Russia shifting dramatically once again. The provisional government, weak and unable to solve Russia's pressing problems, especially the war, is losing popular support. The Bolsheviks, with their clear and uncompromising message of peace, land, and bread, are gaining strength. You feel the ground trembling, anticipating the next major upheaval. The Romanovs, thousands of miles away in their Siberian exile, are mere pawns in a much larger, bloodier game, utterly unaware of the final tragic act that awaits them. Their isolation in Tobolsk is not merely physical, it is an isolation from the rapid political currents that will soon seal their fate. You are now transported to a more chilling chapter in the Romanovs' captivity. As the political winds in Russia shift decisively and violently, the relatively stable, albeit isolated, existence in Tobolsk is shattered by the thunderous arrival of the October Revolution. You feel the palpable dread that seeps into the governor's mansion as news of the Bolsheviks' seizure of power in Petrograd reaches the remote Siberian town. This event, far more radical than the February Revolution, extinguishes any lingering hopes of the family's peaceful exile or restoration. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, have a very clear and brutal agenda regarding the former imperial family. For them, the Romanovs are not merely a deposed dynasty. They are potent symbols of the old regime, a constant threat of counter-revolution, and potential martyrs around whom anti-Bolshevik forces could rally. You sense the immediate increase in surveillance and the more overtly hostile attitude of their guards. The initial politeness and occasional camaraderie that some guards showed the family quickly evaporate, replaced by suspicion and contempt. In April 1918, a new, more sinister directive arrives from Moscow. The Romanovs are to be moved again, this time to a city deeper within Bolshevik territory. further away from any potential White Army advances. Their destination, Yekaterinburg, in the Ural Mountains. You witness the family's forced departure from Tobolsk, a journey even more arduous and humiliating than the last. Alexei, still suffering from his hemophilia, is too ill to travel in the initial group, which causes immense distress for Alexandra. You see her agonizing over leaving her son behind. A mother's worst nightmare. The family is split, with Nicholas, Alexandra, and Maria traveling first, leaving Olga, Tatiana, Anastasia, and Alexei to follow later once the Tsarevich's condition improves. You observe the initial group's terrible journey by cart and then by train, passing through a landscape that grows increasingly stark and unwelcoming. The conditions of their travel are significantly worse. Reflecting the Bolsheviks' hardened stance, it's a journey filled with anxiety, discomfort, and the chilling realization that their situation is becoming increasingly precarious. Upon their arrival in Yekaterinburg, you are brought to their final, infamous residence, the Ipatiev House. This building, once the home of a wealthy merchant, becomes known as the House of Special Purpose, Dom Osobogo Naznesenia. You enter its confines and immediately feel the oppressive atmosphere. Unlike the spacious, albeit confined, palaces they once inhabited. The Ipatiev house is smaller, plainer, and far more restrictive. Its windows are painted over to prevent them from seeing or being seen by the outside world. A high wooden fence is erected around the property, transforming it into a veritable fortress. Armed guards patrol constantly, and their presence is much more intimidating. You hear the heavy thud of their boots, the click of their rifles, a constant reminder of their captivity. The regime of their imprisonment becomes much harsher. You observe the complete lack of privacy. Guards are often stationed directly inside the house, sometimes even sleeping in the same room as the imperial children. You see the family's belongings meticulously searched and often confiscated. Their access to fresh air and exercise is severely limited, confined to a small, enclosed courtyard for only short periods. The food they receive is meager and often unappetizing. You feel the constant humiliation and dehumanization they endure. A systematic stripping away of their former dignity. Nicholas, though still calm on the surface, records his frustrations in his diary, often noting the intrusive nature of the guards. Alexandra retreats further into her religious devotion, finding solace in prayer amidst the indignities. The children try to maintain their spirits, reading, drawing, and engaging in simple games. But the cheerful energy that once defined Anastasia begins to wane under the unrelenting pressure. You see the toll it takes on them, the paleness of their faces, the weariness in their eyes. Alexei's health, constantly precarious, is exacerbated by the lack of proper care and the stress of their situation. The commander of the Ipatiev House Guard, Yakov Yurovsky, is a stern, unyielding man, a committed Bolshevik. You observe his methodical and ruthless approach to their imprisonment. He enforces the rules with an iron fist, allowing no exceptions or leniency. It's clear that he views the Romanovs not as human beings, but as dangerous political prisoners, a necessary evil to be contained until their ultimate fate is decided. You feel his cold, unblinking determination, a chilling precursor of what is to come, an interesting, often forgotten detail about their time in the Ipatiev house is the small amount of gold and jewels that the Grand Duchesses had secretly sewn into their corsets and clothing. You can almost feel the weight of these hidden treasures, carried as a desperate hope for survival or a means to bribe their way to freedom. This act, born out of a profound sense of self-preservation, would later play a macabre role in the events that followed. It speaks to their desperate hope against overwhelming odds, a tiny flicker of resourcefulness in the face of absolute powerlessness as the Russian Civil War intensifies around Yekaterinburg. The Bolsheviks grow increasingly anxious about the Romanovs' presence. White army forces, loyal to the old regime, are advancing rapidly towards the city. raising fears that they might liberate the imperial family. You feel the mounting pressure on the Bolshevik authorities in Moscow. The dilemma is clear. If the Romanovs are rescued, they could become a powerful symbol for the counter-revolutionaries, potentially turning the tide of the Civil War. The brutal secret of this period is that their very existence, innocent as it was, became a strategic liability that the Bolsheviks were determined to eliminate. Historians still debate whether Lenin personally ordered the execution, or if it was a decision made by local Ural Soviet authorities in the face of the advancing White Army. But the ultimate responsibility rests with the Bolshevik leadership. The family, isolated and without external communication, remains largely unaware of the extent of the danger they are in. They continue their daily routines, pray, and write in their diaries, often making mundane observations. You read Nicholas's last diary entries, noting the weather, a game of patience, or a brief walk in the garden, utterly oblivious to the dark fate rapidly approaching. It's a harrowing experience to witness their unsuspecting innocence. Knowing the brutality that awaits them, the tension in the Ipatiev house becomes almost unbearable. You sense the guards' increased nervousness, their whispered conversations, and the almost constant presence of Yurovsky. The air is heavy with an unspoken dread. It's the calm before a catastrophic storm, a quiet that precedes an act of unimaginable violence. The Romanovs, confined within these painted-over walls, are utterly at the mercy of their captors. Trapped in a house that is about to become their tomb, you are now ushered into the chilling darkness of the night of July 16th, 1918, inside the Ipatiev house. The air is heavy with a suffocating dread, a palpable sense of impending doom that permeates every corner of the house of special purpose. You feel the cold, hard reality of their final moments as the Romanov family, entirely unsuspecting, prepares for what they believe is just another night in their increasingly harsh captivity. The family has finished their evening meal. You observe them going through their usual routines. Nicholas reading, Alexandra and the Grand Duchesses saying their prayers, Alexei resting in bed, struggling with his chronic illness. The guards outside seem more numerous, their footsteps heavier, but within the house. The family remains oblivious to the sinister preparations underway. This is the brutal secret of their final hours. They are kept entirely in the dark, spared the terror of knowing their execution is imminent, only to be plunged into a terrifying ambush. Shortly after midnight, Yakov Yurovsky, the house commander, enters the Romanovs' rooms. You see him wake them, instructing them to dress quickly. He tells them there's an emergency, that White Army forces are approaching, and they need to be moved to a safer location, ostensibly to the cellar for their own protection. You feel the stirrings of confusion and perhaps a flicker of annoyance from the family, as they are rousted from their sleep for yet another relocation. Alexei, too weak to walk, is carried by Nicholas, a poignant image of a father's enduring care even in their darkest hour. The family's small dog, Joy, trots faithfully behind them. You follow them down the narrow staircase, into the cold, damp, semi-basement room. There are no windows, only a single light bulb casting a harsh, artificial glow on the bare walls. You see two chairs brought in for Alexandra and Alexei, allowing them to rest. The rest of the family, Nicholas, the four Grand Duchesses Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and their four remaining loyal retainers, Dr. Eugene Botkin, their physician, Anna Demidova, Alexandra's maid, Ivan Kartonov, the cook, and Alois Trupp. The footmen stand waiting, perhaps for a vehicle to arrive. They stand in a cluster, a small, defiant island of familial unity against the encroaching darkness. Yurovsky enters the room, accompanied by a firing squad of Bolshevik guards. He is calm, almost chillingly composed. You feel the temperature in the room plummet, the air thickening with an unspeakable tension. Nicholas, sensing something is profoundly wrong, steps forward, perhaps to ask a question. But before he can utter a word, Yurovsky reads a short, brutal statement. In view of the fact that your relatives are continuing their attack on Soviet Russia, the Presidium of the Ural Regional Soviet has decided to execute you. The words hang in the air. A death sentence delivered with cold, bureaucratic detachment. You witness the family's immediate reaction: shock, disbelief, terror. Alexandra and Olga attempt to make the sign of the cross. Nicholas, ever the father protecting his family, reportedly says. What? As if he hasn't quite grasped the horrifying truth. Then, the brutal, deafening roar of gunfire erupts. The small room instantly fills with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. You witness the horrific chaos as the firing squad, composed of both disciplined and undisciplined shooters, unleashes a volley of bullets. The room becomes a scene of unimaginable carnage. The initial shots are not immediately fatal for everyone. The Grand Duchesses, in particular, are partially protected by the diamonds and jewels they had secretly sewn into their corsets, which act as impromptu bulletproof vests. Deflecting some of the shots, you see the grotesque scene unfold, bodies falling, some still moving, groaning amidst the smoke. The maid, Anna Demidova, survives the initial volley and attempts to defend herself with a small pillow filled with jewels, but she is quickly bayoneted to death. Alexei, shot but still alive, makes small sounds, and Yurovsky himself delivers the final. Fatal shot to the boy's head. The guards, in a frenzy, use bayonets and rifle butts to ensure no one remains alive. The small dog, Joy, somehow escapes the slaughter, a silent, furry witness to the horror. The execution is not clean or swift. It is prolonged and agonizing. This horrifying detail is a brutal secret that underscores the savagery of the act. The presence of the jewels sewn into the clothing prolongs their suffering, turning the execution into a prolonged butchery. It takes a terrifying 20 minutes for all 10 victims to be finally silenced. You feel the cold efficiency of the murderers contrasting with the sheer desperation of the victims. Once the last breath is taken, Yurovsky and his men begin the gruesome task of removing the bodies. You observe the chilling, methodical nature of their actions. The bodies are stripped, loaded onto a truck, and driven into the forest, to a deserted mine shaft known as the Ganina Yama. Here, the initial plan is to simply dump the bodies down the shaft. However, the mine is too shallow, and the water is not deep enough to completely conceal the remains. So, the plan changes. You witness the macabre scene in the forest. Under the cover of darkness, the executioners attempt to disfigure the bodies beyond recognition by dousing them with sulfuric acid and setting them alight. This is done to prevent any future identification and to quash any potential cult of martyred saints. It's a grotesque attempt to erase their very existence, to deny them even the dignity of a proper burial. This level of brutality, the desire to obliterate their identities, is a chilling testament to the Bolsheviks' fear of the Romanov legacy. An interesting, though horrifying, detail that emerged much later is that the remains of 2 of the Romanov children, identified later as Maria and Alexei, were missing from the initial burial site. This absence fueled the decades-long speculation about Anastasia's survival, creating one of the most enduring historical mysteries of the 20th century. The brutal disfigurement and disposal methods contributed directly to this long-standing enigma. The execution of the Romanovs is a pivotal moment in Russian history, marking the definitive end of the imperial era and the brutal birth of the Soviet state. You feel the profound sense of finality, the irreversible rupture with the past. The Romanovs are not just dead, their very memory is intended to be erased, their existence deemed a threat to the new order. The Bolsheviks immediately issue a press release, stating that Nicholas II has been executed, but deliberately concealing the fate of the rest of the family for decades. Fueling rumors and speculation, the brutal secret of this night is the cold, calculated nature of the murder, driven by political expediency rather than personal hatred. The Romanovs were sacrificed not for what they had done in that cellar, but for what they represented. Their deaths were meant to send an unequivocal message the old world was dead, and the new. Revolutionary era had begun, violently and decisively. You leave the scene of the massacre with a sense of profound sadness and the lingering stench of gunpowder, knowing that the echoes of that night would reverberate through history for generations to come. You emerge from the chilling confines of the Ipatiev house. But the story of the Romanovs does not end with their brutal demise. Instead, it transforms into a haunting historical puzzle, a decades-long saga of lost graves and lingering legends. You now find yourself in the immediate aftermath of the execution, as the Bolshevik regime attempts to erase all traces of the imperial family. A cover-up that would inadvertently create one of the 20th century's most enduring mysteries in the days and weeks following the murders. The Bolshevik authorities in Yekaterinburg meticulously worked to conceal the crime. You observe the executioners returning to the forest, attempting to further destroy and hide the remains. They dismember the bodies, douse them with more sulfuric acid, and then bury them in two separate, shallow graves beneath a railway bridge in the Kopti forest, along a dirt track known as the Porosenkov log. This brutal effort to obliterate their identities is born out of fear that the White Army might retrieve the bodies and use them as rallying points, and fear of the international outcry if the full scale of the massacre were known. You feel the deliberate, chilling intent behind these actions, not just to kill, but to erase. Despite the Bolsheviks' best efforts, rumors begin to spread almost immediately. The official Soviet announcement confirms only the execution of Nicholas II, keeping the fate of Alexandra and the children secret for decades. This deliberate ambiguity, coupled with the fervent hopes of monarchists and the natural human desire for a fairy tale ending, fuels the persistent speculation that one or more of the Grand Duchesses, particularly Anastasia, might have survived. You hear the whispers, the tantalizing hints of escape, the desperate longing for a living Romanov heir. You witness the various individuals who come forward over the years, claiming to be a surviving member of the imperial family. Some are clearly delusional. Others are con artists seeking fame or fortune. Each claimant brings a renewed flurry of attention, forcing historians and scientists to re-examine the evidence. The most famous of these claimants is Anna Anderson, a woman who emerged in Germany in 1920 claiming to be Grand Duchess Anastasia. You observe her remarkable resemblance to the real Anastasia, her intimate knowledge of court life, and her stubborn refusal to be identified by any other name. She spoke with a slight German accent like the Tsarina, who was German-born, and recounted details of her survival, including being wounded by a bayonet. Her claim sparks a decades-long legal battle and an international fascination. You see the deep divisions she creates. Even within the surviving Romanov relatives, some are convinced by her story, while others dismiss her as an imposter. For many, she offers a beacon of hope, a tangible link to a world that was violently swept away. For others, she represents a dangerous fraud, disrespecting the memory of the truly deceased family. The saga of Anna Anderson captures the world's imagination, becoming the subject of books, films, and endless speculation. You feel the emotional pull of her story, the desire for a royal survivor, a happy ending to a brutally sad tale. Historians still debate the extent to which popular culture, particularly Hollywood films, amplified and perpetuated the Anastasia myth far beyond what the actual historical evidence supported. It's almost as if the world wanted a survivor. Regardless of the facts, meanwhile, the precise location of the Romanov burial site remains a closely guarded secret of the Soviet state. For decades, Access to the area around Yekaterinburg is heavily restricted. The details of the execution and the disposal of the bodies are known only to a select few within the Soviet secret police. And any historical inquiry is suppressed. You feel the oppressive weight of Soviet censorship, the deliberate obfuscation of truth, which only deepens the mystery and feeds the rumor mill. The Soviet narrative is that the Romanovs were justifiably executed enemies of the state, and their precise burial location was irrelevant. However, the truth cannot be suppressed forever. You follow the work of amateur historians and geologists, working in secret, often at great personal risk, to find the burial site. One particular figure, Alexander Avdonin, a geologist, becomes obsessed with uncovering the truth. You observe his meticulous research, his clandestine interviews with former guards, and his tireless exploration of the Kopti forest. For years, his efforts yield nothing but frustration. An intriguing detail that prolonged the mystery was the Soviet government's demolition of the Apatiev house in 1977, ordered by Boris Yeltsin, then the head of the local Communist Party, to prevent it from becoming a pilgrimage site for monarchists. This act, ironically, only fueled suspicions and solidified the belief among many that the regime had something to hide. Further cementing the brutal secret of the Romanovs' fate in the public consciousness, it was a clumsy attempt to erase history, which only served to highlight it. Finally, in 1979, Avdonin and his team make a breakthrough. They covertly locate the main burial site at Porosenkov Log, unearthing what they believe to be the remains of 9 individuals. They rebury the bones, keeping their discovery secret for years, fearing that the Soviet authorities would destroy the evidence. This act of quiet, courageous preservation speaks volumes about the enduring human desire for historical truth. Even under the most repressive regimes, it is only after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in 1991, that Avdonin feels safe enough to publicly announce his findings. You witness the dramatic unfolding of this discovery as the Russian government, now under a new era of openness, launches an official investigation. The remains are exhumed, and the painstaking process of identification begins. This moment marks a turning point, moving the story from the realm of legend and speculation into the domain of science and hard evidence. The bones, once deliberately lost, are finally ready to speak. The brutal secret of this period is that the disappearance of the bodies, far from erasing the Romanovs, only magnified their story and turned their demise into a global enigma. The official silence and deliberate obfuscation by the Soviet state inadvertently gave rise to decades of fascinating, heartbreaking, and ultimately futile quests for a survivor. The missing bodies created a vacuum that was filled by hope, fantasy, and the desperate yearning for a different ending. The stage is now set for scientific revelation to finally lay these lingering legends to rest. You now stand at the threshold of a new era, one where the long-held secrets of the Romanov family are finally brought to light. Not by whispered rumors or desperate claims, but by the undeniable power of modern science. After decades of mystery and suppression, the bones unearthed in the Kopti forest are ready to speak, offering concrete answers to the haunting questions of the imperial family's fate. In the early 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the newly formed Russian government initiates an official forensic investigation into the remains discovered in 1979. You observe the painstaking process that begins, a meticulous examination of skeletal fragments, teeth, and other evidence. Scientists from around the world are called upon, including forensic anthropologists and geneticists, to ensure the highest standards of accuracy and objectivity. This is a monumental task. Given the condition of the remains and the deliberate attempts at disfigurement by the executioners, the primary method for identification becomes DNA analysis. You witness the cutting-edge technology of the time being applied to historical remains. Samples are taken from the bones found in the forest and compared to DNA samples from living relatives of the Romanovs. including Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, a grandnephew of Empress Alexandra, and the descendants of Grand Duchess Xenia Alexandrovna, Nicholas II and its sister. This comparative genetic analysis is the crucial step in confirming the identities of the victims. The initial findings confirm what many had suspected: the main grave at Porosenkov Log contains the remains of 9 individuals. Through meticulous anatomical and DNA analysis, they are identified as Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and 3 of their 4 daughters: Olga, Tatiana, and Anastasia, along with Dr. Botkin, Anna Demidova, Ivan Karatanov, and Alois Trupp. You feel the profound relief that accompanies these confirmations, bringing an end to decades of uncertainty for these individuals. However, a new mystery emerges from this discovery. 2 sets of remains are conspicuously missing from this main grave. These are the remains of Tsarevich Alexei and one of his sisters, believed to be Maria or Anastasia. This absence immediately fuels the lingering Anastasia survival myth, providing a fresh surge of hope for those who still clung to the idea that a Romanov heir had escaped the brutal massacre. You hear the renewed whispers, the television documentaries, the newspaper articles speculating anew on the possibility of a surviving Grand Duchess. It seems that even scientific discovery cannot immediately extinguish a deeply ingrained popular legend, an intriguing and somewhat chilling detail emerges from the initial DNA analysis when comparing the mitochondrial DNA of the female remains to that of Prince Philip. There's a slight discrepancy in one of the bone samples. This small genetic anomaly initially causes concern and raises questions about the authenticity of the remains. However, further research uncovers a rare genetic mutation within the Romanov family lineage, known as heteroplasmy. This means an individual can have 2 distinct mitochondrial DNA sequences within their cells. A subsequent exhumation of Nicholas II's brother, Grand Duke George Alexandrovich, confirmed the presence of this same mutation, thereby validating the identity of the Tsar and, by extension, the rest of the family members found in the grave. It's a subtle scientific detail, but one that was critical in dispelling doubt and cementing the brutal truth. Despite the compelling scientific evidence, the Russian Orthodox Church, along with some segments of Russian society, initially expressed skepticism about the authenticity of the remains. You observe the cautious approach taken by religious authorities, who prefer to wait for absolute certainty before canonizing the family as martyrs. This highlights the complex interplay between science, faith, and national identity, particularly in a country grappling with its Soviet past. Historians still debate whether the Church's initial reluctance was purely theological or partly influenced by a lingering political resistance to fully accepting the truth about the Bolshevik past. The search for the 2 missing children continues. For years, dedicated researchers, inspired by the 1991 findings, systematically re-examine the historical accounts and meticulously search the area around the original gravesite. Their efforts finally bear fruit in 2007. You are present for this momentous discovery as a team of Russian archaeologists announces the unearthing of 2 partial skeletons in a separate, smaller pit near the main grave at Porosenkov Log. These newly discovered remains are subjected to the same rigorous DNA analysis. You watch as samples are taken and compared to the DNA of the previously identified Romanovs and their living relatives. The results are conclusive. The bones belong to a young male between the ages of 13 and 14, and a young female between 18 and 19 years old. This perfectly matches the ages of Tsarevich Alexei and Grand Duchess Maria at the time of their deaths. The DNA analysis is definitive, confirming that all 11 individuals, the entire Romanov family, and their 4 loyal retainers were indeed executed and buried in the Kopti forest. This final scientific confirmation lays to rest, once and for all, the long-standing myth of Anastasia's survival. Anna Anderson, the most famous claimant, is posthumously disproven by DNA tests conducted on her preserved tissue samples, which showed no relation to the Romanov family. You feel the bittersweet relief of this resolution. While it brings a definitive end to the mystery, it also confirms the utterly brutal and complete annihilation of the imperial family. There were no survivors, no hidden heirs, no miraculous escapes. The brutal secret revealed by the bones is the chilling efficiency and ruthlessness of the execution and subsequent disposal. The attempts to disfigure the bodies and separate them into different graves were successful enough to create a century of confusion and speculation. Yet, ultimately, scientific advancements proved more powerful than any cover-up. The bones speak a cold, hard truth, a truth that could not be silenced by political decree or historical revisionism. The human stories, the legends, and the desperate hopes that swirled around the Romanovs for so long are now anchored by the irrefutable facts unearthed from their shallow, secret graves. The final act of this tragedy, so long shrouded in darkness, is now fully illuminated. You now stand at the final chapter of the Romanov saga, where the scientific confirmation of their brutal end gives way to the enduring legacy they left behind. Their tragic demise reverberates through Russian history and echoes across the global consciousness, a chilling reminder of power, revolution, and the unforgiving hand of fate, with all the Romanov remains identified and confirmed. The story moves beyond mere historical mystery into the realm of national reckoning and remembrance. You witness the solemn state funeral held in 1998 for Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters, along with their loyal servants. In the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, it's a poignant moment, a symbolic act of reconciliation with a past that had been buried and distorted for so long. You see world leaders and Romanov relatives gather, observing the somber ceremony that finally offers a dignified resting place to the imperial family. The absence of Alexei and Maria from this initial burial highlights the ongoing process of truth and reconciliation. As their remains had not yet been formally identified and laid to rest with the others, the full identification of all 11 bodies, confirmed in 2007, brings a sense of finality to the forensic investigation. However, the question of where Alexei and Maria's remains should be laid to rest continues to be a point of contention, particularly for the Russian Orthodox Church. You feel the complex interplay between science, state, and faith. While the government accepts the scientific findings, some within the church maintain a cautious stance, requesting further DNA testing to fully acknowledge the remains as truly belonging to the Tsarevich and Grand Duchess. This ongoing debate underscores the profound spiritual and historical significance of the Romanovs for many Russians, especially after their canonization as passion bearers by the Russian Orthodox Church in 2000. For the faithful, they are not just historical figures, but saints who suffered for their country. The brutal secret of their legacy is the indelible mark they left on the very identity of Russia, the fall of the Romanovs, and their subsequent execution, paved the way for the Bolshevik rise to power and the 70-year experiment of Soviet communism. You see how their story became a cautionary tale for both monarchists and revolutionaries for the former, a warning against clinging to absolute power in the face of change. For the latter, a chilling example of the lengths to which revolutionary fervor can go. The Romanovs represent the end of an old world and the violent birth of a new one, a rupture that continues to shape Russia to this day. You consider the broader historical impact of their fate. The execution sent a clear message to any internal or external forces considering supporting a counter-revolution. It solidified the Bolsheviks' hold on power and eliminated any figurehead for a monarchist restoration. This ruthlessness became a hallmark of the Soviet regime, setting a precedent for political purges and the systematic elimination of perceived enemies of the state. It's a chilling reminder that power, once seized, often exerts itself with extreme prejudice. The Romanovs continue to fascinate the world. You see countless books, documentaries, and films dedicated to their lives and deaths, Why this enduring global obsession? Perhaps it's the stark contrast between their immense wealth and their horrific end, a dramatic illustration of fortune's wheel. Perhaps it's the personal tragedy woven into the fabric of grand historical events, a loving family caught in the crosshairs of a revolutionary storm. Or perhaps it's the lingering romanticism of a lost empire, a final glimpse into a world of czars and empresses before it vanished forever. Historians still debate whether the Romanovs' story is more a testament to the tragic flaws of an individual ruler or an inevitable outcome of deep-seated societal problems that had been simmering for centuries. The truth, as often is the case, likely lies somewhere in between. An interesting aspect of their post-mortem legacy is the rise of what some might call Romanov tourism. You observe people from around the world visiting sites associated with the family, from the grand palaces of St. Petersburg to the grim Ipatiev house site in Yekaterinburg, now the Church on the Blood. There's a solemn reverence, a morbid curiosity, and a profound desire to connect with the physical spaces where this extraordinary story unfolded. It's a pilgrimage to a lost world, an attempt to grasp the tangible remnants of a history that seems almost too dramatic to be real. You might even find yourself contemplating their final. Small possessions, now preserved in museums, each item carrying the weight of their tragic journey, their individual stories. 2. Continue to resonate. Nicholas, the gentle but indecisive Tsar, struggling with the burden of an empire too vast and complex for his temperament. Alexandra, the devoted mother and fervent believer, whose blind faith led her down a dangerous path. Alexei, the frail heir, whose illness shaped the family's destiny. And the 4 grand duchesses, their youthful innocence tragically cut short, forever frozen in time as symbols of lost possibility. Their personal struggles, fears, and hopes make them incredibly relatable. Even amidst their imperial grandeur, the final resting place for all the Romanovs, including Alexei and Maria, is still not fully settled, while their remains are held by the Russian state. A decision regarding their burial with the rest of the family has faced various delays and complexities. This lingering issue serves as a metaphor for Russia's ongoing struggle to fully reconcile with its tumultuous 20th century. To integrate all the painful truths of its past into a coherent national narrative, it's a reminder that even after the bones have spoken, the echoes of history continue to demand attention and resolution. The story of the Romanovs is not just a tale of revolution and death. It's a profound meditation on power, faith, family, and the brutal, often unforeseen, consequences of historical change. It reminds us that even the most powerful dynasties are ultimately vulnerable to the currents of time and the will of the people. Their secrets, once buried and whispered, are now laid bare, offering a complete, though heartbreaking, picture of a family caught in the crucible of history. The dim light of the ancient palace fades. The whispers of the past grow softer, and the chilling echoes of a brutal secret finally settle into silence. You drift back from the grand halls and grim cellars, leaving the Romanovs to their eternal rest. Their story now complete, their mysteries unveiled. The final threads of their tragic tale unravel, leaving only the quiet hum of the fan, a gentle drone that pulls you deeper into the quietude of the night. Their journey is over, and yours, for now. Draw us to a close. Close your eyes. Let the weight of their history melt away and surrender to the embrace of sleep.